A seemingly random Sigma strat just beat one of the best Wu-Yang teams in the world. So how did they do it? Just last weekend, Team Liquid pulled out Sigma to everybody's surprise as an answer to the dominant Wu-Yang meta. Keeping in mind, the last time I saw Sigma was in that cursed double shield screenshots. So get ready for some W eats with Grasp, game-winning perk choices, and finally, a potential answer to Overwatch's most broken supports.
It's about damn time.
Now, my pyramid structure is making a big return. I know, big news. And each layer is gonna get more complex, so you get smarter. Standing ground is the fundamental starting points. And this is kinda specific to the enemy team, GK, where they're running Sojin Wu-Yang. For context, Ultraviolet is insane on Wu-Yang. There's literally a waterbender thumbnail edit of Ultraviolet as Wu-Yang, so it makes sense as to why Liquid want to come up with a solution that shuts down the Wu-Yang. But the Sig isn't just for the Wu-Yang, the Sojin plays a part too. Sigma can shield off their damage, mark and threaten them from walking up, and grasp under pressure. Now, I'll talk about heroes that Sig might have a harder time against later, but that last point becomes super obvious in the very first fight. GK have 3 different angles straight onto the Sig, which you'd think would force the Sig to walk backwards. Instead, Infected is able to stand his ground by grasping all of the damage that comes his way, as well as briefly shielding off the ball Wu-Yang Tracer. Soon after, because Infected stood his ground, he's able to hit the rock onto Kajor, who's desperately trying to leave. The Suzu also definitely helps keep the Sig alive, so shout out RuPaul. Now sure, Sig can stand his ground, but you might just shrug and not give a fuck.
Okay.
So why does it matter? Well, if GK are able to force Infected to give up all the space, then they're freely able to dive, or they can just take the points. But if Infected can hold the space just by virtue of his character, that becomes a lot harder to do because then he's a threat to the Wu-Yang or Sojin. I mean, if you're Wu-Yang, would you want a Sigma shooting at you while your ball dives in? Not really. To hammer this point home, Zarya is one of the most popular tanks we're seeing right now. But if Zarya was in this same situation, I'd bet Sugarfree's hairline that the Zarya would be forced to give up all the space. Why? Because Zarya is very squishy. And trust me, the Sojin Wu-Yang would go on a killing spree if there's no tank to zone or mark them. You can see more of this consistent marking and zoning soon after. Kajor rolls through on the ball, trying to pressure the Sig and Sojin from behind. But Infected is once more able to stand his ground, cycling between his shield and his grasp, and putting it up once more to zone off the Sojin. You can see how tough it is for Lethal to just find any value. His shield just blocks your angle, and his poke threatens you from walking up. RuPaul also finds the first pick onto Ramon, which opens the floodgates for Team Liquid to win the first fights. You can see Infected pop the shield to relieve pressure off the Sojin, while also finding that Lucio killed just after. We're not even done there, as Infected also catches the ball with the rock once more, confirming the kill. Which actually gives me the perfect segue into the next layer of the pyramids, absorbing and pushing forwards. We've already covered how Sig is good at absorbing Sojin and Wu-Yang pressure thanks to his grasp and his shield, and even his rock, also known as the Rock, plays a vital part too when it comes to absorbing that ball pressure. In fact, Kajor swaps onto the Winston, probably because he just wants to counter the Sig. But when it comes to the rest of Sigma's team, it's not quite as clear how they can absorb. After all, Kiri's supposed to be squishy, right? Yet somehow, they only have 2 deaths this entire map.
How?
Well, notice how first fight, RuPaul is playing behind the choke. He's not walking forwards. If you watched my top video, you'll know just how important this is. It just makes it way more dangerous for characters like Tracer to actually reach and connect with the Kiri. The Suravasa map pick by GK is kinda bait too. Yes, it's great for ball, but the long narrow sightlines obviously benefit Sigma's range, and they don't help Ramon to flank around. I bet Liquid's coach, Kasores, was celebrating when he saw that map pick. Absorbing's only half the story though, because eventually you need to push. And it just so happens that Sig is pretty good at that. In this next fight, Kajor tries to bubble off the Sig from his team, again the goal being to force the Sig back and take space. But the bubble just gets completely shredded, forcing Kajor to immediately leave. Infected also shields off the Wu Yang, minimizing his impact. This is now the perfect time for Liquid to push forwards, because the Winston can't punish you for it. He's already gone, just like my dad's. RuPaul layers the Kitsune on top of the push too, and GK's carry player, Ultraviolet, gets caught in the crossfire. But Liquid aren't done there, they still want to keep pushing. The enemy Winston and Tracer try to jump to the right side, probably because they want to eventually force points. This is also called staging, or setting up your angles. But Infected does a Miles Morales, doing his own thing and hard pushing that Wu Yang Sojin backline, which importantly disrupts the Winston Tracer staging. Because of this pressure, Ultraviolet catches a railgun and pops the Tidal Blast onto his Tracer. But remember, Sig can stand his grounds. Infected's able to grasp away, and the Suzu just about blocks the Tidal Blast. Infected does end up going down to the Pulse Bomb, but honestly, if Vega beat it in time, this would have been a very winnable fight for Liquid. Good thing he makes up for it later though. Honestly, it's that proactiveness to push the Winston Tracer that's super important. You cannot let them take angles on you for free. You will get surrounded and you will die. Now though, Infected's armed with the Flux, also known as the Slam Dunk. He pops it early to once again disrupt the Winston dive. But what's different this time is that Infected shields the main angle before he fluxes, meaning that the enemy Sojin Wu Yang have to leave, otherwise they're gonna get cooked by the enemy Sojin who's got that Sig shield. As a result of GK all leaving, so does the Winston, giving a perfect opening for him to get fluxed. This is exactly as how Unter, a pro coach, described it.
That's the idea of the Sigma, right? Like you throw up the shield, UV has to play far, suddenly there's this huge separation between backline and front, and Kajor just gets no help.
Back to the fight, and pretty much every important cooldown from GK gets forced out, whether that's the Wu Yang wave or the Winston bubble. Even better considering Infected hits the rock too. And while GK tried to burn the Sigma, Vega comes in clutch with that beat to keep him alive. During the beat, Lethal pops the overclock, but once again, he struggles to find an angle, in part because of that Sig shield. Infected meanwhile barely lives, but he's able to once again mark the Sojin, almost landing the kill despite missing the rock. Still, the Sojin dies. Now though, we get an Infected masterclass. He hits both his shots onto the Tracer, forcing the recall, and once more, he's able to basically zone off the Wu Yang entirely, not just blocking his shots, but stopping him from walking up so he can't heal his tank. Kajor is probably begging for help while primaling, but he's definitely not getting it. The Kitsune by RuPaul allows Infected to still stand his ground, and considering everyone on GK gets shot down, mostly by the Sigma, Liquid take that first point. A key signature of how Liquid are playing is that they're very proactive in not letting the Winston set up. And the Sigma's been a very key part to that story, with the stakes only getting higher next fights. Infected swings the corner early again, cycling between his shield and his grasp. During this, Kajor wastes his bubble on the corner. The reason it's a waste is that it's super easy for Liquid to disengage and punish the mistake after. Honestly Kajor, I love you, but this bubble reminds me of that Drewski skit.
With the W9 and the W2.
Now, having absorbed the Winston bubble, it's Liquid's turn to push back. And you can see Infected does so by hunting down the Lucio, and Tree does so by popping the overclock. This great rotation by Liquid, having the Sig and Sojin ever so slightly split, means that it's really hard for GK to outmaneuver Liquid and take their own angles. Kajor is forced to jump the Sojin because of the overclock, but it doesn't deal or fix the Sig problem. Infected's able to stand ground and push it once he forces Kajor away with the rock. And of course, he pushes it with that Flux, catching and killing pretty much everyone. Now yes, it doesn't help that Ultraviolet's Tidal Blast is more useless than the average creatine gummy, but it's clear that Liquid are very well drilled to push any small advantage they have to the fullest. Now that Infected has unlocked both his perks, I think it'd be a good time to go through them. For his minor perk, Sig has the choice between recharging his shield based on the damage he does, or by reducing his accretion cooldown based on how much damage he absorbs with Grasp. Infected chooses the shield perk, likely because the point of playing Sig here is to zone, so having more shield allows him to do that. The major perk choice is between the ability to levitate, or the ability to make enemies levitate away from you with a charged up quick melee. Honestly, if GK ran a comp built to run over the Sigma, maybe that melee perk becomes useful. But considering that the Levitate perk literally saves Infected's life later on, I think it ends up being a pretty reasonable choice. What isn't reasonable though, is how GK played the next fight. To nobody's surprise at this point, the Winston fails to force the Sig to walk back, and while they force the Kitsune, just by virtue of Liquid having an extra ult, they finish off GK pretty cleanly with a beat. Which allows me to talk about the next key idea, dead zones and baiting. A dead zone is simply an area of the map that people either can't play or don't play. Basically it's off the map. For example, when Liquid rotate to the coast side, the coast is their dead zone. Dead zones are vital when trying to beat dive because now you can't take any angles behind Liquids. All the damage has to come from the front, which makes it easier to absorb. After all, unless you're me, I don't think you'd like taking back shots. Now, this isn't new. The London Spitfire pioneered this a few years ago, but it's refreshing to see it now. So, when cover jumps in and Lethal pops the overclock, there's just no angles to get on Team Liquids, and Infected does a good job shutting down the overclock, constantly shorting off any angle that Lethal takes. Cover thinks he can commit with the Primal, and he does boop off both the Sig and the Kiri, but thanks to that clutch major perk, Infected is able to fly back to the high grounds. And while his Kiri still gets booped off, Vega claps back with an insanely clutch boop onto the Winston, getting 20% ult charge off that kill. Still, GK get the first cap, but this is where we get into the baiting idea, which is so well executed that Ramon may get his pulse eaten. Baiting is fairly simple, it's just applying pressure to force the enemy team to have a bad engage. We'll start with that applying pressure bit. Most obviously, this looks like what Infected does here, pressuring the Soj with his shield and with the rock. As a result, Kuffer is forced to have a scuffed engage just to boop the Sigma away, and it gets worse because Ultraviolet uses his Tidal Blast, likely because he sees his ball going in. This really ugly forced engage by GK means that the Soj Kiri have a much easier time retreating and living. In other words, they bait GK to engage, which all stems from the pressure that the Sig applies. Speaking of the Sig, Infected also just yoinks Ramon's Pulse Bomb out of thin air thanks to his grasp, also known as the Kirby Suck. After Infected sucks up the Pulse Bomb in the most nonchalant way ever, and when the dive is over, that is his window to push forwards. Using that levitation perk once more to pressure out the Wu Yang, and combined with Tree's overclock, Liquid take back the fights. Now, as a quick aside, during that whole exchange, Zero was forcing the points, which would also count as applying pressure because it pressures GK to engage quickly or they give up the space to Liquid. Either way, it's a win-win. Straight after, we see more of Team Liquid being proactive, this time pushing the tempo with the Kitsune. GK just aren't ready or set up yet, so even though Kuffer tries to pole drive in, the Kiri Sojin successfully avoid it, just like they did the last fight. And from there, the Tracer Soj gets split and pounced on, securing another fight win. Now, the last fight does get messy, but I really want you to pay attention to how little Lethal does with the overclock. Infected shields it away from the main choke initially, wasting Lethal's precious time and forcing him to slide up to the high grounds. Despite that, it still gets shielded off anyways, and the only target Lethal can shoot is the Sigma. Eventually, he's forced to go back, and he does try and take an angle to the right side to outmaneuver the Sig, but by then it's too late and the enemy Soj just one-tapped him in the Kitsune, and just like that, all of GK's aura was gone. But surely that's not it, right? Why is this the only time we've seen Sigma, and what could have GK done to beat it? Well, that's where we get into the last layer, the counters. And we kinda already saw some of it. You see, in Samoa, the first map Liquid played, they lost, despite playing Sigma the entire time. So what changed? Well, 3 things. But before I reveal those, a quick coaching plug. Get my Sparta-approved coaching down below if you want to improve at the game. Back to the 3 factors. The first is the Sojin over the Freya. We saw just how much Lethal got shot down, especially at the end on Sojin, whereas someone like Freya is just a lot harder to mark because of her verticality and shorter cooldown on the dashes. Funnily enough, GK banned Freya in that map 5, likely because Tree on Team Liquid was destroying on Freya earlier, but this kinda shot themselves in the foot. The second factor is Symmetra. Sim can shred through a Sigma. Obviously his grasp does fuck all, and you can charge beam off his shield. We've seen GK play Symmetra before, and I've even glazed it in my past videos, so who knows why they're not playing it. Maybe the lights got too bright. Zero was also playing Symmetra on Samoa, which I think is a big downside for the SIG comp. Tracer is a lot better at proactively marking dive characters, kinda like we saw at the start, where Zero was marking the ball. And lastly, GK's signature Lucio Wuyang is tough to play into Sigma. When I was talking to Capitology, a former pro coach, he mentioned how the counterplay against SIG is to speed your hit scan around the SIG shield, but that's hard to do in Lucio Wuyang because the Lucio is stretched thin, so the SIG has an easier time marking the Soj or the Wuyang. Combine everything in this video, and the Sigma call is one of the smartest and yet ballsiest strats I've seen in a while. Let me know your thoughts down below, and as always, if you enjoyed, do subscribe because I'm very close to hitting 50k. Click the video on screen too, and until next time.